Now, let's move on to talk about certain theoretical properties of this algorithm. In particular, we want to know whether this algorithm will converge or not. Okay, under what situation will you converge? If it doesn't converge, what does it mean? Okay, so we want to look at the optimality of this perceptron algorithm. So, first thing I want to mention is that this perceptron algorithm will give you a global minimum because it does make your cost function go into 0. However, that global minimizer is not unique. You can have a lot of global minimizers, and then they're still not unique. Okay, so think about a situation where you have a flat bottom. Okay, and so all the minimizers they can minimize your cost. However, they are not unique because you have multiple of them. Same case is happening here. Let's say you have two classes of data points. Okay, class 1 and class 2. And then you find one separating hyperplane. This will give you 0 loss. Okay, that will be 0 because the left-hand side, right-hand side, they have perfectly classified. Same for this line, that line, this line, this line. Okay, all these lines they are classifiers according to the perceptron algorithm. They are all giving you 0 loss functions. So they are all correct solutions as far as my loss is concerned. Okay. And this is showing you that you can have a lot of minimizers, but they're not unique. You can have a lot of these. Compared to logistic regression and compared to the linear regression, especially the linear regression case, you have a global minimizer. Okay, because your loss function is 2 norm square, and you have a global minimum point. Okay, but for perceptron algorithm, it's unclear, right? Because you have all these possible lines that give you the same minimizer. So the first thing is that it is not unique. What else? Well, there's also a difference between what we want to solve and what we have solved. Okay. Now remember that in the very beginning I mentioned that the perceptron algorithm is an algorithm to solve the soft perceptron loss. Ultimately, what we care is the hard perceptron loss. Now, there's a gap between the two. So I say, let me write it this way. I say that theta star perceptron is the output of this perceptron algorithm based on my soft loss function. And then I have an ideal solution, which is the hard perceptron loss solution, which is just this hard case. So I have this theta star hard. So what you can show is that since this is the hard case, and of course you put this theta star hard into this hard loss, it has to be the lowest, no matter what happens, because this is the minimizer. Now, the interesting thing about this perceptron algorithm is the bottom. Okay, you can actually show that by putting your theta star, which is your perceptron algorithm solution that is based on your soft loss function, you put into the hard loss function, it will equal to the same loss of when you put the hard solution into the hard loss. I am not saying that these two are identical, because I'm just showing you that there will be the solutions that are non-unique. Okay, so you can have multiple of them that give you the same loss value. What I'm claiming is that you put in the perceptron solution here, you put in the true solution there, they will give you the same global minimum value in terms of the loss function. Okay, this is a very, very powerful thing, because normally you're solving this problem. This is a very hard problem. You don't know how to solve it. But then this is a relaxation. Normally, relaxation won't give you the true solution of this one. But then, in this case, it's indeed the case. The uniqueness of the perceptron algorithm solution can be analyzed as follows. What I claim is that as long as you have a theta star that minimizes your hard loss function, then by putting any constant alpha multiplied with your theta star, that will also give you the same solution. That means you can minimize the hard loss function. Now, why is this true? Well, because you look at this g function here, and then you put an alpha times theta into your g. Because your g is linear, this alpha will just come out naturally. Okay, so this alpha times W and alpha times W0, you can just grab the alpha out. It will become alpha times the W transpose X plus W0. That's the linearity of your discriminant function. Okay, so that's very important. And so if G is positive, and therefore this will also be positive because it's not doing anything but just scaling this number up. And therefore, if your decision is positive 1, then even if you put a alpha times theta, it is also plus 1. So it's not going to change your decision. And therefore, what will happen is this. I want to show you that on the left-hand side, you have this hard loss function evaluated at theta star. And then on the right-hand side, I want to show you that it is the hard loss function evaluated at alpha times theta star. So one is the scaled version of the other. Going through all these proofs, you can see that the left-hand side equals to the right-hand side. And therefore, you have a no unique solution. Okay? All right, so putting an alpha here. Now, why is this the case? You can just go back to the intermediate 2 steps. One, you have a theta star. The other one is alpha theta star. This argument holds, this equality holds because of the argument above. Okay, so you can see that if theta star is a solution, I can just multiply theta star by any alpha. I can still get a solution. That also shows you a non-uniqueness of the perceptron algorithm. So you ask, where does this non-uniqueness come from? Well, there are 2 sources of non-uniqueness. The first source is the initialization. Okay, what do I mean by initialization? Well, because the perceptron algorithm has to start from somewhere. Okay, now if you go back to this diagram, you see that I have a starting point. I have a separating hyperplane. How do you pick this separating hyperplane? Well, just pick it randomly, right? And so it really depends on how you initialize your separating hyperplane, because in your algorithm, you need to define the set MK. And eventually, you need to define the set M1, the first set of misclassified samples. And to start with that, you need to pick your classifier. So if you pick your initial guess here, and then according to the perceptron, okay, so if you start with this pink line, you start with this one, and then you gradually update your perceptron algorithm, you can go to here. But if you start with this line, and then according to perceptron algorithm, you go there. Okay. Now, why is that if I start from here, I won't go there? It's because you want to find a separating hyperplane that can just make sure that the 2 classes, they're perfectly classified. There's no reason that this line should be there. As long as it finds a line that can separate the 2 classes, it's done. It's stopped. Okay. So you have an initialization that will lead to a different solution. That's the first reason why you have non-uniqueness. The second reason why you have a non-uniqueness is that you have a different step size. So remember, in gradient descent, there's an alpha, there's a learning rate there. Okay, and that learning rate will tell you how quickly that you want to make your step forward. If you make a small step, then you can get a line here. You will get a decision here. If you make a step really, really big, then you may oscillate a little bit, and then you just stop somewhere there. Okay, so that would be the second cause of non-uniqueness. Okay, so after knowing that the non-uniqueness of the perceptron algorithm, we can also ask that can we make the algorithm a little bit of computationally friendly? By computationally friendly, I mean that let's don't look at all the misclassified samples. Can we just look at a subset of misclassified samples? Because if I can update a few of them, I'm still making an update. It's just not as good as I'm updating everyone. So that will lead to a thing called a batch mode perceptron algorithm versus an online mode perceptron algorithm. Okay, now if you do deep learning, you also know there's something called a mini batch or whatever. Okay, so that's similar. Okay, the batch mode is that I'm looking at all the misclassified samples. Okay, the online mode says that I'm going to pick one of them. Now, can you do something in between? Oh, of course, yes. You can say I can just pick some of these misclassified samples. Okay, so now you have a big spectrum of variation. Okay, you can say I only want to update one sample or update all the samples or update some samples. That's up to you. If you update all the samples, you run into batch mode, then that is the perceptron algorithm that we have described. If you update one sample, that's called the online version. That is exactly the same as doing stochastic gradient descent. Okay, so if you ever wonder why do we want to learn stochastic gradient descent in the first 5 lectures, it's because here now you're seeing this again. Okay, you will see stochastic gradient descent later on. Okay, but look at the stochastic gradient descent. If you randomly pick one sample, okay, then you have a randomized coin flipping process. You update one sample, that's exactly stochastic gradient descent. If you take the expectation, that will give you the same solution as this one. So the online mode versus the batch mode, that is the difference between the two different perceptron algorithms. If you read a textbook, normally the first thing they will teach you is the online thing. Why? They want to impress you that how easy the perceptron algorithm is. All right, because they want to show you that perceptron algorithm can be executed by just looking at one misclassified sample at a time, and eventually it will converge. This story is true. Okay, the story is also true that if you start with a batch mode, you will also get a converged solution. Okay. So now you may wonder what would be the difference in terms of algorithm. So let me run you an animation here. Here I have a set of data points, the red dots, and also the 2 sets of red dots. One is on the positive side, the other one is on the negative side. And then I run the perceptron loss using CVX. So I literally type down the soft perceptron loss value because it's a convex function. Therefore, I can put into CVX. And then I click a button, I wait for several seconds, and then that will give me the black line. Okay, so that would be the one solution returned by CVX. Okay, now why does CVX choose the solution? I don't know. Okay, but CVX giving me one solution, and I know that the CVX solution is somewhere there. And then I'm going to run my perceptron algorithm as what I'm describing here. Okay, and then I'm going to run the gradient descent. And so let's see what will happen. So I will start with a blue solid line, okay, like this one, and then here is my decision. Okay, so you have the dotted line, that will be my decision. If I run one step, I will move to the left. Why? Because all these are misclassified data points, right? So you're looking at here, these are correct, this is correct, but these are all misclassified data points. And so I want to make an update of my misclassified data points. I want to make sure that after one iteration, I have fewer misclassified data points. I cannot guarantee, but I hope that I can have fewer. So if you run more iterations, it will be like this. So gradually, it will go there. Okay. Right? See, there's a sudden jump. Oh, it will go there. Okay. Now, why is this jump? Well, that's also mysterious because you can just go anywhere. Okay. It really depends on the alpha that you choose and where they are at that current iteration, and then they will jump somewhere. And this is a solution. Why? Because you don't have any misclassification anymore. Okay? This is not a solution yet because you still have one red circle that is misclassified. But you go there, everyone's already classified. Is it unique? Not unique. Okay? But that is a classification boundary, and that works. Okay. So that's the online mode. Okay? So online mode says that I'm going to work one at a time. Okay, see that one at a time. Now, by running the online mode is not, okay, it's possible that you can make 2 updates at a time. Okay, so although you say that my algorithm is going to look at one sample, by correcting one sample, you may have been a very good day that you can correct 2 samples. Okay, because by moving that line, you can possibly handle 2 samples, 3 samples. You just don't know what's happening. But in principle, this online mode is handling 1 point at a time. If you run the batch mode, it would be like this. Batch mode. Whoop. Okay. Look at it again. Whoop. Okay, it's done. Okay. So that's the batch mode. All right. So it's a small difference that online mode take you several iterations. The batch mode take you one iteration. Okay. Now, is batch mode guaranteed to be always better? In principle, yes, okay, because you're now looking at the all the samples together. But will you ever run into any kinds of oscillations that may make your algorithm not happy? It is possible, okay? So let me show you this iteration. This is talking about the step size. Okay, so now you're running into batch mode, and then your step size is too big. Okay, very, very big step size. So you have this one, and then you make a step size. Okay, so now, so the previously what happens is that your step size is appropriately chosen. Okay, now you ask me how do I appropriately choose my step size? The answer is by trial and error. Okay, by doing it a few times, then you know what is the correct step size. But here I just randomly pick a number. Okay, now it's not working well because then you're making a very, very small updates because your step size is too big. So you oscillate somewhere here, there, okay. And in this example, it's just making a very, very slow update. Okay, so now let's talk about the not so easy case where your two data sets, they are linearly not separable. Okay, now, I haven't told you that the story behind all these experiments. Look at this. This is linearly separable. Okay, I didn't mention that, but you realize that it is linearly separable, at least in the training set. So what happens if your training set is not linearly separable? Now, I'm not even talking about the testing set. I don't have access to testing set. I'm only talking about the training set. What if the training set is linearly not separable? Then what will happen to your perceptron algorithm is that it's going to go there and go back, go there and go back and oscillate and forever. Okay, it won't stop. Now, if you run the CVX, for some reason, CVX can still find you a solution, probably because there's some implicit, okay. Why the CVX still be able to find you a solution is because the function itself is convex, okay? So although the loss function doesn't go to 0, you can still find something. Now, what that something means is unclear. It can just be something. But if you run the perceptron algorithm, because you want the perceptron algorithm to stop at 0 loss, it just won't stop. So let's see what will happen in this animation of if you have two classes, they are linearly non-separable, meaning that the training sets, they are overlapping. Okay, so you look at the top, you have red circles here. At the bottom, you have red circles there. So what will happen is this. You run this. Okay, so you go here, I'm pretty happy. Okay, I'm going to there. Is it a good classifier? Yeah, maybe, but then, no, not right, because I still have a misclassified data point here. Okay, and then at the bottom, I still have a misclassified data point here. And so I keep going. Okay, I'm overshooting. Okay, then I'll go backward. Still not good. Okay, and then you go backward, it's too much. Right, so you see that it's just not converging to anywhere. Okay, so now what is CVX? Well, CVX will give you something in the middle. And that's just because it's minimizing the loss function. Although the loss is not 0, you can still report a solution. Okay, so that would be the dotted line. Okay, so that is the perceptron algorithm. Okay, it has certain limitations, and then it has certain properties. It's a very easy algorithm. It's the algorithm that you would normally learn in the first chapter of a machine learning textbook. But it clearly has pros and cons.